Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is Matter 23, Delivery and Monitoring, and it's 9:30, so we shall open the session. For those of you who haven't met us, which I'm sure everyone has met us now throughout the sessions, I'm Dr. Rachel Bust, and this is my colleague, Caroline Malloy. So we're the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. Can everyone hear me at the back? Can everyone just check their devices, mobile phones, laptops, anything else, are switched to silent while we're in session? And just a reminder of the microphones, you need to keep quite close to them so the system can pick up everything that you're saying. We're being live streamed by the council, so microphones are important, so anyone who's viewing the session can actually catch everything that's being said. Does anybody have any objections to the live streaming? Could the council just remind us of the housekeeping matters of fire alarms, etc.? Thank you.
Yes, there's no planned fire alarms testing for today, so if the fire alarm goes off, it is a real fire alarm. We will vacate the building using the emergency exits clearly signposted. The rendezvous point is on the Broadway, which is next to Costa Coffee. Toilet facilities out the chambers to the left-hand side, and there's refreshments just across the seating area.
Thank you. We do have an agenda for the session. Has everyone got sight of the agenda? Thank you. So we have read all of the representations made at the Regulation 19 stage and the hearing statements as submitted associated with this matter. So just to remind everyone taking part in the discussion, you should have provided the evidence in your original representation, and the hearing sessions are not an opportunity to submit anything further unless it's a matter which we need to hear something extra on. So does anyone have any questions at this stage about the session? Thank you. So just a matter of housekeeping, Ms. Malloy?
Yes, I just wanted to raise a point, seeing that Lewisham House number 1 are here. After matter 17 last week, seems a long time ago now, Landsec have asked to submit a legal opinion in terms of the, the sort of freehold, leasehold arrangements, and in terms of the potential delivery of the site, either independently or as part of the whole. And I just wanted to raise the fact that that we're minded to allow the submission of that legal opinion in terms of the fact that it goes to the delivery of the site. So I just wanted to raise that and make you aware of that. But just to say that although we're allowing submission of it, and I believe it's only a couple of sides of A4, it's not a lengthy opinion, that we will allow the council the right of response. We will allow Lewisham House the right of response to it, in the interest of fairness, but we'd draw the line after that. So we don't want a toing and froing on it. So, so just to flag that up, that it will be submitted. We will give 2 weeks from the close of the hearings today to allow any comments on that from either the council's perspective or from Lewisham House, and then we shall draw a line under it because we don't want that toing and froing. So I just wanted to flag that up, seeing as you're here today. So that's where we are with that. So if you could keep an eye out for that. Did you have any comments on that?
No, thank you very much, Madam, for bringing that to our attention. I'm glad that we have come here today and can be apprised of that. We will be putting in a response because I am aware of Landsec's arguments broadly on this point already, and I know that we don't agree with them, so we will need the right to respond. But I'm grateful that that's been given. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think the council seem to be happy with that approach.
Yes, we're happy with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving back to matter 23. Should we just introduce ourselves for the benefit of the live streaming, beginning with the council, please?
Good morning, David Syme, the head of strategic planning at Lewisham.
Good morning, Julia Robbins, DCT manager at Lewisham.
Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Karol Jakubczyk. I am the Council's Planning Policy Manager.
Morning, Chris Benham, Knight Frank, on behalf of Lewisham House number 1.
Good morning, Heather Sargent of Council on behalf of Lewisham House number 1.
Good morning, Ben Ford of Quad on behalf of Landsec.
Thank you for that. So from the agenda, we're going to start with the infrastructure delivery plan. And just a few questions on that to the council, please. So does the IDP contain the full range of infrastructure necessary to support the development proposed throughout the plan?
If I start off and then for the details, bring in Julia. In terms of our infrastructure delivery plan, the council has, through the plan preparation process, engaged with our infrastructure providers at each stage and continuously through the development. What we have sought to do is provide those infrastructure providers with the necessary information for them to model the needs and then come back to us on what is required to accommodate the level of growth that we are anticipating. So we provided them with the population projections. We also provided them with the spatial strategy and an outline of where the growth is intended to take place within the various wards within the borough. This enables them to take a holistic view in terms of the growth, but also a more place-based approach as well in terms of where the key focal points for population growth within the borough is likely to take place over the next 15 years or so. We updated the infrastructure delivery plan or prepared the infrastructure delivery plan prior to the Regulation 18 consultation, and that was subject to public consultation. We then updated it prior to the Regulation 19 consultation, and we have sought to update it again in response to the inspector's questions this year. In terms of the document, it runs through the key components of infrastructure required to deliver the plan, including public transport infrastructure and transport infrastructure, social and community infrastructure, schools, libraries, etc. And for each of those, it talks about the position currently, and then the future growth, and then identifies at the end of each section a table which effectively identifies key infrastructure projects that will be delivered or could be delivered through the plan period. I think it's probably quite important to identify some of the challenges, particularly focused on London in terms of infrastructure planning. As you'll be aware, we are one borough of many, and our residents have the choice to send their kids to schools out with the borough. They have the choice to register at GPs out with the borough. So infrastructure planning on a borough level can be quite challenging for our infrastructure providers. I think it's also fair to say that in terms of our infrastructure providers, they're often not looking at a 15-year period. Quite often they're looking at 5 years in advance and providing us with information for that 5 years. And their modelling, for example, doesn't necessarily cover the full plan period. That is certainly the case with schools, for example. And then finally, I just want to make the point that it's, again, and maybe I'm labouring the point, but it's a very dynamic situation in London in terms of infrastructure needs. So again, given the example of schools, we are constantly, in terms of the council, looking at the need for new places in response to population shifts. So in 2008-9, for example, and moving through for the next 5 years, we had a bulge in pupil places required for primary schools and had to respond accordingly, building extensions to primary schools to accommodate that. What we're finding now is that that is contracting quite quickly, and there are a number of school places in primary schools throughout the borough. So again, I just want to highlight the difficulty of infrastructure planning, which is why the IDP is seen by the council as very much a live document, and it is a document which is recognised by the council as a whole as quite a significant important document. We regularly take this to Sustainable Development Select Committee to monitor the infrastructure required, and that will continue. So there is a Mayor and Cabinet agreement, commitment from the planning team to update the infrastructure delivery plan internally every year, and then externally every 2 years as a live document, which will then go to the relevant committee. So it's very much a live document. In terms of how that then translates into the local plan, where we have identified particular need for infrastructure such as leisure centres, and we know that they will be accommodated on some of our larger site allocations, they are included as development requirements within the site allocations. And the example for that would be Surrey Canal Triangle, which, through the strategies that we've provided in terms of leisure facilities, we know that there is a demand and a need, and there will continue to be a demand and the need to respond to population growth. And for the north of the borough, that's been accommodated within Surrey Canal Triangle site allocation and is part of the approved or resolution to grant scheme. Likewise, when the approval for Combo's Wharf was the site allocation previously in the core strategy, there's a requirement there for a primary school, and that is baked into the development requirements. Whether we need that primary school now is open to debate, but it is a requirement in there to consider that. So that's the way that we have we've fed the IDP through. Those infrastructure requirements will be funded by a number of sources, including SIL, and we have a SIL governance structure agreed by Mayor and Cabinet and the Council, and we are committing SIL to strategic infrastructure projects through a prioritisation process. For site-specific infrastructure. We do that on a site-by-site basis. There's obviously an analysis which happens through the development management process, responding to our developer contributions SPD. We can capture those contributions through Section 106 agreements through the development management process. Yes, so very much a live document, very much factored in, or the outputs from the infrastructure partners have been collated into those tables, and then where appropriate and where necessary, they've been provided into the site allocations.
Thank you. So overall, does the IDP provide the confidence that the necessary infrastructure will be in place to ensure that the plan delivers on the allocations?
Yes, the council contends that the IDP does provide certainty in terms of the infrastructure that is required. That's underpinned by a series of strategies, an agreement, for example, and we've talked about this, the One Public Estate strategy from the trust and the council. And we are actively involved in delivering that infrastructure that is required to accommodate growth, allocating sale funding to projects that are required to support the level of growth needed. There are some significant big ticket items on that or within the IDP. The plan growth isn't predicated, as we've said, on the Bakerloo line extension, for example. And there are some items within that infrastructure delivery plan that cannot be delivered simply by SIL or Section 106 alone. And that will require external funding, whether that's DFT funding, health funding from central government or from the trust, etc. So there's a recognition that there is definitely a funding gap, but that isn't unusual in infrastructure delivery plans. And the council is committed to working with our infrastructure providers to bridge those gaps where they exist.
Thank you. So you said there that there's a regular dialogue with the infrastructure providers. So should something unusual crop up, would the IDP be able to respond to changing circumstances? You talked about you take it to members internally each year, and then every 2 years it's sort of more formally updated.
Yes, that's correct. Julia and her team, the developer contributions team, are in constant dialogue with the development partners, in dialogue in terms of spend of Section 106, spend of SIL, reviewing the strategies, and the infrastructure delivery plan through the plan process has been recognised by Mayor and Cabinet and by Sustainable Development Select Committee as a key document, essentially. And for better or for worse, we've agreed to update that yearly internally. So that will be looking at our and liaising with our internal infrastructure providers such as leisure, schools, etc. And then externally every 2 years. And externally every 2 years because it is much more time consuming to liaise with external partners such as the NHS Trust. But nevertheless, and I'm sure Julia will confirm this, is that constant dialogue between external stakeholders is happening all the time as well. So if there was something that cropped up, we would know about it, and we'd be able to have that within the IDP and then have discussions about how we would accommodate that spatially within the plan. I can't think of anything that hasn't, because we have relatively up-to-date strategies in terms of our community infrastructure, the One Public Estate strategy, the leisure strategy, etc. I can't think of too many surprises that would crop up, albeit, I appreciate that this is over a 15-year period. So it may be that, when we're reviewing the IDP on a bi-yearly basis with external stakeholders, and then we're coming to year 6 to 10, for example, there may be something that crops up. Julie, anything to add?
Just to say, there is a requirement when we allocate strategic seal that the project that's being allocated to has to be in the IDP. So there is a kind of holistic overview. It links to the capital programme as well. So the gateway for getting strategic seal before prioritisation is the project has to be in the IDP. And that really does keep people talking to us, because they know they can't get any funding unless their project is in the IDP.
So in terms of the latest updates, we asked in our initial questions and also in the MIQs about up-to-date position on things, as there were unconfirmed, sort of to be confirmed, listed in some of the tables. So the council statement in matter 23 has got some appendices added with some focused updates. We do fully appreciate that it's a living document, and you're not entirely in control of people's funding cycles and their project planning as well. Just turning to some of the tables in the back of your statement, the council statement, page 37. So just looking at strategic infrastructure list for healthcare and emergency service facilities. You got your statement open?
Yes.
So I was just looking at the 7 fields, PCN, the Downham Clinic, etc. That in the previous IDP, I think that had a cost of 250,000, but the updated list is now 2 million. I'm just wondering if there's anything particular that's changed about that, if you know of any particular reason. So this is about reconfiguring a site to improve the integration of services and increase capacity. It seems to have increased, just as one example, quite significantly. And there'll still be a funding gap.
I think we'd have to get back to you on that in terms of what the rising cost, the rising cost is. There may be explanations I can give, but I don't want to. If we can get back to you on that, and then we can provide get back to the infrastructure provider and see what where the change and why the change.
Thank you. That would be helpful. That one in particular just stood out. Costs obviously can increase. I appreciate that, but that was quite a jump, and I wondered what had changed for that. So in terms of the IDP as a whole, is this the most up-to-date position that we can get at this point in time?
Yes, as I said, officers following the inspector's requests have been to all infrastructure providers, and this is the most up-to-date list that we have.
We appreciate that the council has done its best really to to plug the gaps that were in the IDP, but there are still some gaps in terms of timescales, and it's just really in terms of how that might affect the delivery of the plan. Obviously, the IDP helps to underpin the delivery, whether that's going to cause an issue in terms of the plan moving forward and delivering the sites within the plan.
We are due to update the IDP again starting in September with a holistic review, external and internal, and that will be updated then.
Just put your microphone. I don't think it quite switched on.
Sorry.
There we are.
Yeah, we plan to do another update in September, which will be with external partners as well as internal partners. So we can provide that as soon as that work is done to you.
I think as we've said, and I think as has been recognised, clearly there are funding cycles and there are project cycles that are committed, that the infrastructure providers have provided to us, and there are those that are not, and particularly towards the end of the plan period, 6 to 10, 10 to 15. Those commitments haven't been confirmed yet, and therefore our infrastructure providers just don't have the information to provide us with that information. We are not concerned about that slowing down the delivery of the plan because of the the good working relationship that we have with our stakeholders and the constant dialogue that we have with them and the regular updates that we do to the IDP. And I think Julia's point is quite important about linking SIL spend to the infrastructure delivery plan has really sharpened the focus, and we've seen this over the last few years, really sharpened the focus in terms of our infrastructure providers providing us at an early stage with the priorities and with the kind of funding requests, because they know that if it's not in the IDP, that they might struggle to get funding. So I think we'd acknowledge that there are gaps, and in an ideal world we would love to plug those gaps, but we just don't have the information to hand.
Where there are gaps, are there any particular sites that may be dependent on those particular projects, for example?
Generally speaking, the approach to delivering infrastructure, aside from those that are identified within the site allocations, the leisure facilities, the primary school at Convoys Wharf, etc., the general approach has been to or the general strategy is the re-provision and expansion on existing sites. So that's certainly the health, the One Public Estate strategy, for example, re-provision, redevelopment, refurbishment. So they're not reliant on third-party land by and large. Likewise for our schools, again, the short-term strategy is or has been to refurbish and expand existing schools. There isn't a need at the moment for new provision. The only slight anomaly is projecting into the future. We may require some secondary provision, but again, there are a couple of sites which have been identified as potential options for that, which are council-owned sites. They're not in the local plan at the moment because the decision hasn't been made on which of those sites, and also because of the uncertainty over the longer term as to whether or not that is required. So I don't think there is a particular constraints. The only one that I can think of which is a constraint is Surrey Canal Triangle and the delivery of the station. And there is a Grampian condition being kind of agreed at the moment about the delivery of that station, unlocking the second phases, the second, third, fourth, and fifth phase of that site.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful to have the updated version of the IDP when it's available. And you talked about September, so if we could have that as an action, please, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Just to be clear in terms of the timescale, so we'll be starting the revision of the process by September. It normally takes a couple of months for us to get that turned around. Happy to provide it if that works in terms of timescale.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the timetable, for taking forward modifications, etc. Because if there is significant change in the IDP, that may cause an issue later on in the process. So we'll bear that in mind when we're discussing the timetable for modifications and adoption.
Just to confirm, whilst obviously we have the regular kind of update, given that we have updated fairly recently and have reached out to all of our infrastructure providers, we don't anticipate any significant changes to the IDP.
Thank you. Anything final from the council on the IDP? Thank you. Let's move on to some policies now then. So DM1 is working with stakeholders to deliver the local plan. I've obviously got your statement. I don't have any further questions arising from that particular one. So moving on to DM2, which is infrastructure funding and planning obligations. I think there were a few representations to this one. I picked up the Metropolitan Police wanted a bit more of an explicit reference to the need for policing Section 106 contributions in policy DM2 or the supporting text. Does the council feel that's necessary?
No, I think that's far too detailed for the local plan within the policy and also for the supporting text. We haven't done that for other infrastructure. There is a section in the IDP on that, which provides greater detail.
And the representation from the HUDU picks up about social and community infrastructure. I think this is criterion E little f. And they've just picked up the point about social and community infrastructure as a phrase. Would further explanation be needed, or could health infrastructure be listed as a specific line in the policy?
Inspectors, if I may, this point in part is picked up by one of the proposed modifications. If I'm understanding the question correctly, this point is picked up by one of the modifications to this particular policy. Very modest modification, but it does expand the scope of that definition to include health infrastructure. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that met HUDU, as they like to be abbreviated, that met their requirements.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just looking at part E, and TfL's view that it should be amended to make clear that affordable housing and transport infrastructure share the joint highest priority, linking back to the London plan. Are these joint highest priority in Lewisham, or does the London plan effectively give you no choice in the matter?
The London plan doesn't really give us any choice in the matter, but they would certainly be, up there as the highest priorities in Lewisham as well.
Thank you. That's all I have on DM2. So let's move into DM3. This is master plans and comprehensive development. And I think we've got a couple of participants who are interested in this particular policy. So I'm just going to start with Lewisham House number 1, please.
Thank you, Madam. Obviously, some of the points we made last week are relevant to this policy as well, but I'm not going to repeat those. I know you were taking a careful note, so I'll take those as sort of standing. I mean, I think the 2 points that we particularly wanted to emphasise this morning are the point mentioned by Ms. Malloy, last week. It isn't clear, or this policy isn't clearly enough drafted to indicate whether the master plan is supposed to be for the site itself, if it's part of the site allocation or the broader allocation. Now, I think, been assuming that it means the latter, because it doesn't make much sense to have a master plan requirement just for the site in question. But the more you read the policy, actually, the less clear it seems to become. So I know the council were asked to think about that, and we're basically here just to understand what their response is. The second point is the requirement in D about active engagement with the landowners and occupiers of the subject site. I appreciate entirely that you're not concerned with the extent to which there has or hasn't been engagement with Lewisham House number 1 at this stage, and that's a matter for the application process. But we are concerned that doesn't really mean very much. I mean, to be effective, this policy needs to ensure that any master plan that comes through is deliverable, and a requirement that just says, well, actively engage with other landowners, we think is too easily potentially satisfied. So at the very least, if that requirement isn't going to be strengthened to require meaningful engagement, or something along those lines. To make the policy effective, we would suggest there should be something in the supporting text that explains what the council in concrete terms actually expects a party bringing forward a master plan to do. It must mean more than simply, you know, consulting other landowners along with the rest of the public and then saying, well, we've read what we've had to say and we haven't changed our mind. I mean, that's not going to lead to deliverable master plans that secure the optimum strategy for a site allocation. So those were really the key points in advance of anything the council's got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come back to the council for a response on that? There is an action point on the list to think about, whether further explanations required or policy change or supporting text or both.
Yes, I think we've obviously had several discussions on this master plan policy, and forgive me if I'm talking out of turn, but I think my understanding and the council's understanding is that in terms of the principle that we're trying to achieve in this policy, there is general support from participants and members of the public, etc. So, but there is a little bit, or there is confusion around both in terms of the terminology that we use in the local plan throughout, i.e. referring to wider framework or master plan documents that might cover a wider area, such as the Catford Development Framework versus site master plans, that we need to reflect on and provide some modifications on. And then in terms of the participants' comment on Part D, I wouldn't disagree with that. If it's not clear about the intention is that there is meaningful engagement as part of that master planning process. So we can certainly take a look at that and see. I mean, it does say appropriately consulted the public through the master plan process, including active engagement with the landowners and occupiers. But we can, we can take a look at the wording and see if that is robust enough. And again, we'll be guided by the inspectors as well in terms of whether that is robust, and also look at the supporting text to make sure that they're that is appropriately robust as well. But I think generally, by and large, and again, I don't want to talk out of turn, but aside from maybe one participant, I think we kind of all agree that a master planning process and approach to the site allocations is the correct way to coordinate development, particularly for these large site allocations. But it's just maybe the wording and the terminology within the DM3, but also I appreciate that that's carried through to the site allocations as well. And we agreed to have a look at those site allocation texts, development requirements.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Because in terms of D, would there be any unintended consequences of the wording? Would the council at any stage find themselves thinking that something that was presented to them, they didn't feel that there'd been active engagement and there hadn't been sufficient consultation with the public? I'm just trying to think in terms of implementation. If a developer comes forward with a scheme, and you might not be comfortable with the detail that they've submitted to you, but in terms of the wording that's here, they would obviously say to you, we have been active with our engagement and we have consultation.
Yes, understood. And we'll take a look at that to consider whether that is robust enough. We have had in the past, applications where we with multiple landowners where we have felt that the applicants have not robustly, in fact, not at all, consulted or looked at a master planning approach with adjoining landowners. We don't think that approach is robust in terms of placemaking, and I guess that is what we're trying to rule out here. I think it's fair to say that in the majority of cases, applicants and landowners and developers understand this master planning approach in a London context and are more than willing to engage in that process and more than willing to engage with other landowners through that process. And we've seen that carried out successfully in Lewisham. Nevertheless, your point is still valid that there may be and there is likely to be occasions where that isn't the case, and you know, the council will reflect on the wording and make sure that that is robust enough.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Just in terms of the intention behind the policy and part A, just to clarify the council's intention, is it to provide a master plan for the allocation itself as opposed to just a part of that allocation?
Yes, that was our intention, yes.
And for Landsec, I believe you had some points to make on this. You were concerned about the conflict with the Development Management Procedure Order in Part B.
Thank you, Mum. Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation to date has been very clear, actually. I think that our conversations with the local authority have satisfied our concerns. And there was obviously previously an expectation that a planning application would have a detailed component in it, as opposed to being allowed to come forward as outline only. I think we're satisfied with the intent of the policy to seek the level of detail. And I would just like to reiterate what the council have said. I think from our point of view, it's clear that the master planning process has a very good intent to ensure that there's a holistic approach. And I would say, certainly from our experience, that there is an understanding about how that is adopted in practice, as well as the point about consultation. I think there's very clear kind of protocol out there about how conversations take place with wider landowners. So I think we're generally happy with the approach. We note that there is an action under 123 in respect of the site allocation, and we look forward to seeing the wording on that.
Okay, that's the end of policy DM3. So let's move on to DM4, please. This is land assembly. I think Landsec had also got some comments on this particular policy, and regarding the use of compulsory purchase orders and the word of necessary. So just like to hear from Landsec first, and then the council.
Thank you. I mean, I think our Reg 19, we haven't submitted a hearing statement on this. It was more in respect of just the technicality of the wording that we made comments on. So that's, I guess, just kind of tightening up the structure of the policy and the reference in there to section 203 of the Housing and Planning Act, which links into compulsory purchase as well. So it was more structure of the wording than anything fundamental. And I think we're obviously there are no modifications, I believe, to this policy at the moment. There was an update post consultation, but not to reflect the wording that we've put forward. But I think broadly we are happy with the policy. If there is any further wording tweaks that can be undertaken, that's great, but it's not a critical point of ours.
The council.
Yes, sorry, I'm obviously it's been a long few weeks, but I'm just trying to remember the comments from Land Securities. In danger of giving myself more actions here, I wonder if we could take that away and have a look at the representation and then respond to that.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Lewisham House number 1.
Thank you, Madam. Just to say, our view is that it's not necessary to amend the policy and that it's effective and sound as drafted. And in particular, I think one of the suggested modifications is to remove the wording that says only where necessary. We don't see why that could be justified, because the council shouldn't be using compulsory purchase powers where it's not necessary. So we think the wording as is sound.
Does the council have any final comments on policy DM4?
No, just to say that we'll take that point into consideration as part of the action, and obviously come to a balanced view on that policy.
Thank you. In terms of policy DM5 on meanwhile uses, we've heard about meanwhile uses and temporary uses throughout various different sessions. We don't have any further comments on that one. Thank you. So just in terms of DM6, health impact assessments, I think the HUDU or HUDU, their representation talked about reference as in other policies to the use of planning conditions or obligations should be incorporated. And I wonder if the council wanted to just look across their other policies where they might have mentioned the use of planning obligations or conditions in policies, and whether this policy DM6 should make reference to the need for planning conditions or obligations where necessary. Possibly something to reflect on and have a look through the other policies. I make the point for internal consistency across the plan, really, to make sure if you're doing something in one part of the plan, it's consistent throughout other policies.
Yes, we can do that. We can have a look and make sure it is consistent.
Thank you. That's helpful. Right. So in terms of those policies we've just talked about, 1 to 6, are there any modifications that we need to be aware of, please?
There are a small number of modifications that the council has identified to date. In fact, just 2. Those are included in submitted document PD11. The first of those is modification reference MO144. That is purely to introduce the acronym and abbreviation CIL after the words Community Infrastructure Levy. Moving on, and the council has already made an oblique reference to this modification. Modification reference MO145, also at policy DM2. And that is to part E small f, and the modification seeks to introduce new wording in brackets. So part E small f should now read community and social infrastructure, brackets including health infrastructure, close brackets. That's all of the proposed mods for that set of policies. Thank you.
So let's turn over the page to DM7 and monitoring review, and particularly table 19.1, which is the monitoring framework. So with any monitoring and review process, it's important to make sure that the indicators and the targets and objectives are all specific, measurable, and that's all in interest of effectiveness. So to the council, how did you decide on the monitoring indicators that are in table 19.1, please?
Yes, the council currently obviously has a monitoring framework as part of the adopted local plan process, which then feeds through into our authority monitoring report, which we prepare and publish annually, albeit our most up-to-date AMR has yet to be published, as we've been focusing on the local plan. However, we are generally very good at publishing that on time when we say that it has to be published towards the end of the year or start of the new year. So we took our cues from the existing authority monitoring reports in terms of monitoring things such as housing delivery, approvals for housing, non-residential units, etc. We also looked at the London Plan monitoring framework. And I know there was a question about overlap, and it is something that I want to come back to, but we looked at their effective monitoring framework and how we could effectively dovetail into that to ensure that we were providing some level of consistency there. And then the other aspects we looked at was how do we make sure that the policies within the topic areas are effective, and how we're monitoring, and how do we monitor and measure that. I think having looked through the table in quite a lot of detail over the last few days, I think council acknowledges that there are a number of issues with the table, which may require some work to be done to that. And I just want to sort of set out, I think that the monitoring framework was prepared, I think, with good intentions and to be quite robust and exhaustive, but I think there are some issues. The first is that I think sometimes the performance indicator confuses measuring the effectiveness of the policy in the plan with other planning related matters and projects. And the example that I was working through was progress on conservation areas, for example, which, I wouldn't consider that as measuring the effectiveness of the policy. That is a proactive conservation project that we are carrying out. So there are things within our existing authority monitoring report which we do report on, which don't necessarily need to be in this table because they're not monitoring the effectiveness of the policies within the plan. I hope that makes sense. Secondly, there's quite a lot of references to projects or strategies. Again, the adoption and implementation of the local nature recovery strategy. Again, I would say that that's not necessarily monitoring the effectiveness of the policy. That is, a strategy that the council and the GLA need to develop. I think there's also a little bit of more work required to make sure that that some of the measurements are not duplicating the London plan measurements and are not better placed at that London plan level. And for example, modal shift. That's going to be very difficult for the local authority to, given that it is a strategic London plan policy that is measured at that London-wide level. That's going to be incredibly difficult for the local authority to measure. And then finally, having taken a look through this, I think there needs to be a reflection on one or two of the measures and how realistic they are to be able to complete in a timely manner. And the one that I meant, or the one that I jumped out to me was vacancy rates in town centres, for example. We have in the past prepared town centre health checks, and that is quite a resource intensive process. Doing that annually is probably not going to be feasible. So we might have to consider what an appropriate measure is in terms of our town centres and whether that is achievable. So apologies. So me recognising and acknowledging that I think this table needs quite a bit of work from the council to make sure that we have robust measures that effectively and realistically measure the effectiveness of the policies within the plan and the plan overall.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. So one or two things sort of struck me when I was looking at table 19.1. So I'll just sort of give you my thoughts that will hopefully feed into your reflection on that. I think one of the things that I was thinking about, what exactly is being monitored within the indicators? So is it an approval? Is it a start date for construction? Is it the completion? Just to pick on one, LPI 14, the small housing sites. You've got the target there, but at what stage are you monitoring it? When does it go onto that list and say yes, it's in the column of being completed, or is it an approval? And I think that possibly you could think about that through some of the other measures as well. Also, one of the things that was running around my mind was, are there any particular key monitoring indicators that would trigger a partial or a full review of the plan? What's the strategy for that? There are obviously some big ticket items that the local plan needs to deliver. So would it be those that in your monitoring you would pick up and would automatically trigger a review, or would it be more of a judgment on what the results are?
I think in terms of triggers, I think it's probably more likely to be a judgment. And I think in our response to this, obviously it will take a number of years for us to monitor the policies and monitor the effectiveness of the policies and identify if there are any significant issues. And then we were considering obviously the requirement to review the local plan every 5 years and thinking, how many years would you have to monitor policies before they then that a trend or we could realistically say this policy is not effective and therefore needs to change. And I think there's a sort of blurring there of the timelines. So actually, and given the the lead-in times to review local plans, once this is adopted in sort of 2-3 years' time, we'll probably be reviewing the policies anyway, if that makes sense. So we weren't proposing to have any particularly hard triggers within those LPIs or KPIs, however you want to describe them. But I think it would be based on judgment, and also that the review mechanism or the requirements to review the local plan policies anyway would effectively pick that up.
Yes.
I think it might be useful to just reflect on the fact that we've now introduced a few new type of local performance indicators, and that's the ones that are 52 to 55. Those relate to development within the specific sub-areas. So previously in our AMRs, we have looked at strategic policies, strategic sites rather, and also a range of different policies, but we've never delved into sub-area monitoring before, and I think that would be useful, especially in terms of if there is a need for review of those different sub-areas. So I think that is something new we will be introducing.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think there's also something around what sort of thresholds and what does good look like? Because I think with monitoring, you can monitor lots of things, but it's about making efficient use of time for that monitoring exercise and making it count. So what does good look like in relation to each of these indicators that you're looking at? And I think certainly the first 4 in that table, they're more about sort of planning service monitoring. So you could do that anyway, and councils do that. But the monitoring framework here, I think, is more about the development plan itself. So your authority monitoring report could pick up other things that you want to monitor as a service. But on this table, I think it needs to be the policies in the development plan that you specifically want to monitor.
Yes, I agree. And again, I'm just looking at the table that I've prepared where I was looking in detail, and I picked up that as well. How is this measurable? I.e., should it be 80% of all applications, etc., etc. So I absolutely I acknowledge that there's quite a bit of work to be done to this table to tighten up and make sure that these are measurable performance indicators.
Yeah, I think in terms of sort of targets, looking for targets specifically in these indicators. There's one about reducing health inequalities. I think that was raised by Hoodoo in their Reg 19 rep, and I wondered where they're ones that are perhaps dependent on other partners. Do other partners have particular targets that they're working to, and could they sort of be matched up? So is there an agreed target that Hoodoo are working towards that you could possibly look at in a monitoring table?
Yeah, I think normally you would have a target, something that the plan's seeking to achieve. So in terms of, obviously you have your the housing targets. So that is the target that you're aiming for, an annual delivery of net completions per annum. The indicator is more how you'd measure that, isn't it? So I think that there's just an issue with the terms of reference there. So I think that the indicator is how you'd measure it. Whereas a target is what you're actually trying to achieve. And I think some policies is quite difficult to pin down an actual target, but I think there's some more obvious targets which could be included in there.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll take that away and prepare or amend, make suggestions to this table to make it more robust. The other question I had, I'm sorry, I'm just talking out loud here, but the other question I had when looking at this table, and obviously the officers preparing this were keen to get as much as possible in there. But there are areas which I feel stray maybe beyond the planning service and are actually monitored elsewhere. And I just wonder whether or not we need to duplicate that. And the example that I'm thinking of is the air quality. We have air quality management plans in place. We have monitoring which is carried out, and we have an annual report which is published each year by another department in the council. Do we just simply cross-reference to that, or do we need to replicate it in that? And apologies, that might be just a rhetorical question to the council to consider.
Yes, I think it needs to focus on what the development plan policies are looking to achieve. And obviously, if someone else is monitoring something, then you either just use that information in your authority monitoring report, but you don't need to necessarily do it again yourself. I welcome the council's desire to sort of reflect again on that table, because we could go through each one and talk about that, but I think it's probably more helpful. I think you understand the need to sort of try and focus in some of them a bit more on the targets, and possibly think about why it is that you want to monitor it. There's a tendency to monitor things just because you can, doesn't mean to say that you actually need to. And sort of thinking, well, what are you trying to achieve from this? So LPI 5, which is the design review panel, you've got a number of development proposals considered by the panel, measured annually. And why would that be important? Again, is it a service kind of thing rather than a development plan policy, strictly?
Yes, I think with that one, again, that is something that is included within our authority monitoring report as a kind of factual kind of reporting, which has kind of made it into this table. But I completely take your point, and we need to consider, well, what is the measure of success, and is that measure relevant to measuring the effectiveness of the policy? And it may be or it may not be, but I think we need to reflect on that.
And I think we had some earlier proposed modifications, matter 6, when we were talking about employment, retail requirements and things. So obviously those will be hard numbers that feature, and you can then monitor it against those. So those need to feature in the table.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So I think probably that's as far as we can take this conversation, rather than go through each one of the indicators. Perhaps if we suggest that the council add it to the action list for a review and to decide which targets, maybe separate them out into development plan policy things. If if you wanted to keep your more service type things, just make the distinction, or take them out. Have a think about that. But if you could reflect on those, come back with a revised table 19.1 and a short note to explain the relevance of each indicator and what the changes are that you're proposing, that would be helpful to us.
Yes, we will definitely do that, and thank you. I think we fully understand the points that you've made, and we will we'll return the table hopefully in a shipshape condition.
Now, were there any modifications for DM7 at this stage?
Yes, there are a small number of modifications for DM7. They appear in submitted document PD11 at reference numbers MO146 to MO146, MO147, and if I'm reading this correctly, MO267 as well. First of those, I think, seeks to amend a factual error that's within table 19.1 and relates to LPI 14 small housing sites. The second, again, is a fairly minor factual modification, really deleting the word draft that precedes London Plan. That again is under table 19.1 LPI 14 small housing sites. The final of those, MO267, relates to LPI 22 industrial capacity. Again, if my memory serves me correctly, this is entwined within the sort of wider modifications that came forward as part of the negotiated position with the Greater London Authority around EC2 and how the new local plan seeks to manage industrial land and industrial capacity going forward. The inspectors will remember it was very important to the Greater London Authority that the new Lewisham local plan monitors industrial land availability and industrial capacity going forward. So it's an addition of the text, monitor progress towards meeting the need established in policy EC2B. That's all of the modifications. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Has everybody had sufficient opportunity to make their points in relation to their representations? Right, we have no further questions. That's the conclusion of matter 23 then, and I think we will take a break now for a few moments. 11:10, and that will give people that want to depart an opportunity to depart, and we'll adjourn until 11:10. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Really on the home straights now. Just wanted to look at, so it's a bit of a wrap-up session, really, in terms of looking at any outstanding modifications which we haven't touched on so far. Just where we are with the action points, and also in terms of the next steps in moving forward with the examination. And then to closing, any closing comments. So not the most exciting session, but if you can just bear with us. In terms of the modifications, it did strike us that there are some which haven't necessarily been addressed in the examination. Particularly, I think, in terms of any modifications to the appendices, schedules, etc., and the policies maps. Looking through on the whole, they do link back in some way to the overarching policies in the plan and the matters that we've discussed. And a significant number of them seem to be more minor or additional modifications. So from that point of view, I wasn't going to go through them in detail. It's just whether there are any in particular which you wanted to draw to my attention, which we perhaps haven't covered so far.
Certainly, Inspector Malloy, from my knowledge of the modifications, there are none that sort of go beyond the sort of definition that you've helpfully provided us. I think I would agree. They are particularly those that relate to the back end or latter stages of the plan that are consequential and are inextricably linked to the policies and their supporting text. So the short answer is no.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to flag up. We're aware of them, and obviously through the modifications process, whether it can be finalised in due course. I think it would be worth going through the various action points. Apologies for giving you quite so many, and just seeing where we are with them. We have obviously received some of the action points, but I do appreciate you have been rather busy in the hearing sessions. So I think it's just going through to see, to give an indication in terms of the timescale from the council's point of view. And I think from our point of view, any priorities, which we will be doing a post-hearings letter, which will give an indication of where we are heading in terms of the issues where we said we'd form a view. So some of the action points may be critical in informing our post-hearings letter. So it's just to flag up those ones. So to help you prioritise your action points, I think some will fall into the category of just tweaking wording on policies which are not necessarily critical to the overarching soundness of the plan. So I think there are. It's just helpful to go through them and just make sure we've addressed those points and to give you a steer for moving forward.
I think that's an extremely helpful exercise. Indeed, Angela, if I can sort of give it an insight into our life beyond the hearing sessions. Angela and I were intending to go through the actions this afternoon to try and identify those that, as you say, are urgent and pressing. Just to provide a brief overview before I launch into the actions, there are 210 actions as of this morning. We have, as you have both seen, sought to place them within a sort of a project management table that not only identifies the detail but the type of action. They broadly fall into two forms: modification and providing yourselves and the examination with further information. We've tried stick to that classification. From memory, I think the majority are further tweaks to the existing modifications or agreed new modifications. The remainder are provide further information. So I will, as I go through them, I will I'll differentiate between the two types if that's helpful. I will also identify where we believe the actions are complete, because some have been completed, and well, it'll hopefully become obvious as we go through.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Are you going to take us through them?
I'll give it a go. So deep breath. That they're arranged as the inspectors know, they're arranged in matter order. Hopefully in the order that they arose, and which isn't necessarily in plan order, obviously, is particularly in respect of the site allocations. But again, that will become clear as we go through. So matter one. Action one is actually identified as an action for yourselves, and that's to guide the council on the need to prepare a new LDS in terms of scope and content. So I'll leave that there. Action two, and I believe this may have been.
I'm just wondering, in terms of going through the actions, do you want us to pause after each action to get a sense of whether that's a critical action for a particular period, etc.?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. I mean, in terms of the timing of the LDS, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think it may have benefited from having been updated sooner. To reflect where the plan is in the examination process. It could be updated to reflect the fact that the hearing sessions have been taking place, and and put an potential adoption timescale in there. Or it could be updated beyond that to reflect the adoption. I think to a degree that's within the council's gift. I don't know what the process is for going through, taking the LDS through committee, and what the form of procedure is, how long that would take. If it's going to take quite a while, is it worth waiting till you're nearly nearing adoption?
From my experiences elsewhere, given that local planning authorities enter into examinations, not quite knowing how long the examination may take, there are all sorts of possible obstacles and challenges that the examination process needs to overcome. I suspect that the first of certainly my advice to the council would be that the first of those options is preferable, but because we hopefully in the next few weeks, in the next month and a half or so, we'll have a clearer indication of the trajectory towards adoption, and that will give the LDS and the council the greater certainty that it's not going to be out of date within a short period of time.
Okay, thank you. Yep, I'm going to keep moving forward.
Okay, moving forward, action two was an action for the council, and as I said, I believe that's actually been completed, but we can confirm that obviously, which was to provide one of the participants with further information around the consultation. So yeah, I'm being told that that's been done. Action three was so this is a bit of a more of a long-term action looking forward to the modifications processes, and that's to ensure that the integrated impact assessment which will accompany the main modifications will provide more explanation and clarity around the assessment of options and why options were discounted. In addition, I note there is a the requirement that we provide a freestanding note to the examination process.
I think from our point of view, it's quite important to understand how that decision was made in terms of looking at the alternative options, how the that process then took forward the preferred option. So that, in our view, would be sort of critical to receive that note prior to the post hearings letter.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to matter 2. Again, I believe this is probably an action that is actually, I retract that. This is an action that's still in some respects ongoing, and in actuality relates to an action that's much further down the list, and it's the whole issue of securing and submitting remaining statements of common ground. So I think as we'll hopefully shortly see, that there are still 1 or 2 statements of common ground that remain relevant to the examination. I think notably the one that we certainly anticipate from Network Rail, but also the potential statement of common ground in whatever form or scope it takes with some of the other key land owning and development promoting interests. I think notably, possibly, church commissioners and the developers at Lee. I want to say Lee Green, but I'll look to see whether David
Leagate.
Leagate. Yes, my apologies.
I think in terms of the outstanding statements of common ground, in terms of Network Rail, my understanding was that they wanted to, they didn't want to issue anything prior to the election. Obviously, we're a little way past that now. Do you know what the issue is, what the hold-up is post the election?
I don't, without wishing to speak ill of a participant who's not here, that they have needed a gentle nudge from time to time. So it may just be the case that following this morning, that they'll move along according to the timetable. If you pardon the pun.
I'm not going to comment on that. Yeah, I think obviously we'll be closing the hearing sessions today, and the examination is ongoing. But I think that there's got to be a cut-off point in terms of, receiving that additional information at some point, because obviously we will need to do a post hearings letter. Modifications will need to be proposed. Are there going to be any agreed modifications coming forward through the statements of common ground? So, it's not something that we would want to hold the timetable up for. So I think there does have to be a bit of a cut-off point there in terms of, so hesitant to give you another action point, but if we could agree, and it may be a bit of a prompt to those participants, say 2 weeks within the close of the hearing dates to provide those.
Agreed and understood. Moving forward to matter 3, there are 10 actions from matter 3. The first of those, action 5, was for Transport for London to provide the examination with further details on the timescales and funding of the Bakerloo line upgrade and extension. I believe that that action is completed. Action 6 was an action for the council to provide additional information in its duty to cooperate statement to this was an addendum to an already submitted document, the duty to cooperate statement, to include more detail on record of conversations discussing unmet need, the action was to submit an addendum to that submitted document. if I can move on, action 7, and indeed the remaining actions for matter 3 are all modifications. So the first of those, action 7, was for the council to reconsider whether policies within the plan are strategic or non-strategic in their nature. And the list says consider with below. I am aware that colleagues have gone beyond the call of duty and have already prepared or in the quite advanced stages of preparing an approach that certainly the council believes would respond positively to this and provide that requested differentiation and clarity across the plan.
Be helpful, thank you. Is that still on track for 22nd of July? It sounded very positive.
Yes, but I think in respect of that first week's and week 2's deadline dates, we had identified possible dates. I think the week 3 when we didn't have hearing sessions, I think, if I can just be completely honest, ran away with us. And whilst work is well underway with some of these actions, they're not going to be ready by next Monday.
Can I ask you to give an indication broadly in terms of when those actions may be, for matter 3, when they might be available for? To pin you down.
I'm afraid I can't speak to that instantly, but without wishing to add a further action, we can seek to update that final column.
I fully appreciate that you've been tied up in hearing sessions. I think that middle week ran away with us as well, didn't it? But I think it's useful just to have a target in there. So I could suggest by the end of next week as a target. Would that be more, rather Monday? Would that be more achievable? Let us know through.
I will stick my neck out and say yes, the end of next week. I think if it's not the end of next week, it's likely to be a date much further into August, due to officers being on leave and there being, consequently being limited capacity. So yes, the end of next week we will make it so.
I think what I would say is just, just keep us informed through Ian in terms of any slippages to the timescale. I fully appreciate that people are going to be on leave and we'll come on to our leave arrangements. But, I think it's just keeping that conversation going, really, isn't it? Between the council and ourselves through Ian.
That is very well understood. Thank you. Moving on, action 8, and I remember this very clearly. The council was asked by inspectors to recommend a new or propose a new diagram to demonstrate the links between the strategic objectives and policies. And in brackets, the action has put consider with respect to above. I will give the examination a sort of a heads up. We have considered it carefully. I'll be just completely honest. A diagram doesn't work. However, the solution that we are seeking to provide the examination, we believe does work and achieves the same objectives without the potential complication of producing what could be quite a complex piece of artwork.
Fully appreciate that. Could get quite complicated. What is the solution? Just to...
if I can I know that Angela's possibly not prepared to speak at length on this, but it is Angela's baby. So if I can just pass over to Angela quickly.
Our thoughts on this were that we could include underneath the policy title for each policy a banner or some little box which would then identify the relevant strategic objectives for each policy in there, so it links back to part 1 of the plan. Also within that banner we may include some details about whether the policy is strategic or non-strategic.
I've seen a similar approach in other plans. I think that could work. And as you say, be a bit more straightforward.
Thank you. Moving on, action 9 was to recommend an additional part of policy OL1, setting out an approach to areas that fall outside of designated growth areas. This was, I believe, in response to the sort of the claim or the suggestion by a number of participants of, you know, how does the plan deal with everywhere else? I've marked this as action complete. So if I remember correctly, we've prepared some words for that. So that's hopefully there or thereabouts. Action 10 was to, again, in relation to policy OL1, was to provide a clearer definition of the terminology, growth corridors, growth nodes, regeneration nodes, strategic areas of regeneration in supporting text. So again, my understanding of that action was to introduce modifications that sort of clearly delineate and differentiate those areas as set out in OL1. That's still underway. Action 11 was to add opportunity areas to the spatial strategy plan. That's figure 3.1. So that's a mapping exercise. Given officer availability, that it may not be possible to get that done by next Friday. However, I will say never on that one. Action 12 was to provide a breakdown of the scale of development within the opportunity areas. Action 13 was to add strategic areas of regeneration to the spatial strategy plan. So again, that's a mapping exercise, part of figure 3.3. Matter 14, again, I think because it's fairly straightforward and easy, I've marked as complete. It was a proposed modification, a recommended modification that we amend the wording to policy OL1 part A small e to provide a greater degree of flexibility around the words deliver to enable. Again, if my memory serves me correctly, that was around the Bakerloo line extension. Action 15 is again a final action for matter 3, was in relation to figure 3.2, and that's the references to transport improvement corridors and the consistency of wording between policy OL1 . May I move on to matter 4?
Yes, I think in terms of matter 3, we have a target for the end of next week. I accept the potentially the mapping issues may not be possible. And then, yeah, see how far we get.
Thank you. Matter 4, I hope, which covers actions 16 through to action 20, are all complete, but because there was an obvious urgency to sort of action those points in anticipation of yesterday morning's session. So on that basis, I'm going to move forward to matter 5, if that's okay.
I agree, those are complete. Thank you to Ms. Stewart for that. Yeah, thank you.
So matter 5, which was in relation to the other housing policies, there are about 20 actions identified in those. Those start with actions relating to policy HO3, affordable housing, small sites and vacant building credit specifically. The first of those, action 21, was to provide provide evidence of future supply and trajectory. I've written here that we'll seek to extract that from existing evidence when the council's not intending to produce new material on this area. I've written here that it is suggested that this will identify the proportion of housing that has and will be delivered and which could contribute towards housing supply from those stated sources, specifically small sites and sites that could be subject to vacant building credit because they involve existing structures on sites.
No, just flag up that I would say action 21 would be critical to inform our post hearings letter. So we would need that in order to form a view on that particular policy.
At the risk of making the rod for my back, is that a deadline for next Friday?
It depends how quickly the council wants a post hearings letter, I guess.
Yes.
I think that there are ways we can deal with it. We could say, we could set out our view and recommendation on certain matters, but say we're still awaiting information on other matters. It would be better to have that information up front. But we could deal with it and say we're still awaiting information, but it may need then a second post hearings letter, which I would, hopefully want to avoid. So I think that's why we're sort of trying to flag up really things that would be critical to the post hearings letter. Particularly given that I'm working the first 2 weeks of the holiday and then I'm off for 4 weeks after that. So it's just. Yeah, it's just it would be nice to get that post hearings letter out by the end of the second week of the school holidays. So just touching on the time scale. So I thought it would be useful just to flag up those areas that might inform that. There are ways of dealing with it, but I just don't really want to have to do a second post hearings letter.
Understood.
I think if I may, in terms of that matter specifically, in terms of the proportion of small sites, and I'm sort of remembering the action point. I think the action point was to pull out the small sites proportion and provide a kind of short note on a kind of justification or the evidence to support our position, including pulling out the viability evidence. If I'm remembering correctly, is that the case?
I think it's putting a justification forward for requiring affordable housing on small sites effectively, and in terms of, you know, what have previous delivery rates, for example, been on small sites? What's the projected future delivery on small sites in terms of how critical they are to providing affordable housing? And also, as we discussed yesterday, in terms of the viability aspect, is it viable to request affordable housing on those smaller sites? So yeah, it's sort of pulling together the broad picture, and then we'll be in a position to take a view on that. It sounds as though that information's there. It's just pulling it together in a note.
Yes, definitely the information is there. I'm just conscious. Obviously, the team have been working hard for several months now, and quite a few of us are off on leave fairly shortly. But also, obviously, there is a lot of actions. So I think it's very, very helpful just to go through what are the critical actions that might be needed before, before that letter can be prepared.
Ambitious on our part to do the post-James letter in the, you know, at the end of the first 2 weeks. And I think in terms of the housing requirement scenarios, I think we have some comfort there in terms of the timescale that we would have a supply. You know, sort of if the timetable did slip somewhat. So there's potentially less urgency there, but we'll come on to the timescales a bit later, but I fully appreciate how hard, you know, the team have been working, and obviously I think we're probably all in need of a bit of a holiday. So I think we'll just have to take it as it comes, I think, in terms of the timetable.
I think if it's helpful moving on to the next 2 or 3 actions, 22 and 23, certainly sort of blur into sort of one, and whilst they have been separated out of necessity, they do sort of tread the same path in terms of providing justification around, well, the first of those, action 22, is this explanation of the reference of up to 30% of supply coming from small sites. I believe that has, in discussions subsequent to Matter 5, been partly addressed, but that certainly we can set that explanation out within the small site and vacant building credit more clearly. Action 23 is a sort of a twin to action 21, but with specific reference to vacant building credit. And I believe that probably action 25, skipping over 24, which is a modification, probably can be encapsulated within the sort of the confines of again a note that covers the justification for including small sites within the affordable housing approach, and discounting the national planning policy guidance on applying vacant building credit. So if I can take those as read, action 24 is a modification, and that gravitates around the use of the word exceptional in policy HO3 part M. Would unfortunately need to go back over my notes and read the policy to understand that completely, but it did make sense when I wrote it down. And action 26 is to produce an amendment to the glossary that sits at the tail end of the plan, to identify all relevant affordable rent products that are relevant to the local plan. if I may move forward, the next set of actions relate to policy HO5 older person accommodation. And they are a mix of 2 provide further information and 1 modification. So the first of those, and I believe this arose again yesterday afternoon, action 27 was to clarify the past delivery of a specialised elderly person accommodation across the borough. Again, the council's not proposing to sort of present anything new, other than to sort of disaggregate information in terms of completions and consents that have already been presented to the examination. Action 28 is a possible modification to supporting text paragraph to include reference to the London plan target. That's a fairly modest action. And I think action 29 absolutely interrelates to some of the actions that arose yesterday afternoon in terms of the McCarthy and Stone representation of Regulation 19, and whether the plan making process has proportionately considered viability impact on specialised older person accommodation. Jumping ahead to matter 22, I can confirm that those actions that were identified around that are sort of underway, and Dr. Lee is purely waiting for a deadline, and he will get down to it.
I would suggest that's critical as well, in terms of the timescales.
I can absolutely express that to Dr. Lee, and I've got I've got every confidence that he will expedite that quickly.
Could we say end of next week for that as well?
I'll give it a go. If I may move forward again, the next set of 3 actions relate to policy HO7, purpose-built student accommodation. The first of those is to provide further information. I've put here a further submission paper. So it's to provide further information on PBSA schemes that the council has approved since 2021. I've written here, and I fear that again I'd need to reconsult my notes as an update to the Schmar evidence. I'm pleased Angela's nodding her head, so at least one of us understands what I meant. Action 31 was to consider an alternative wording to policy HO7 Part A. And I do remember this discussion. I think it's repeated as an action further down, and it's the exclusion of the word only and the introduction of more explicit reference to securing mixed and balanced communities. And that's with reference to national planning policy guidance. Action 32 is what appears to be a fairly minor modification to the policy text to make reference to London plan policy and its fast track mechanism, a modification to ensure consistency. Moving on, as predicted, action 33 is practically the same as action 31, a modification again to exclude the word only and make more explicit reference to securing mixed and balanced communities within the context of, in this case, housing with shared facilities, houses in multiple occupation, likewise as above in terms of PBSA. That concludes matter 6. Sorry, was it matter 6? Matter 5, my apologies. Moving on, matter 7, and there's a slightly lesser number of actions here. Matter 34 is a possible modification. So it's to review the title and status of policy TR1 table 12.1 and its associated supporting text. Oh yes, this was to give consideration of relocating the table which currently resides within the policy to the supporting text. I think also within that same context, review the wording of policy TR1 Part C to provide more clarity on the differences between the different types of safeguarding, whether they're imposed by the Secretary of State or safeguarded through the plan itself. Action 35, yes, was also to clarify the status of the schemes that are identified under table 12.1, and again to establish whether they reflect the latest status of those schemes as per the infrastructure delivery plan, and also to provide that clarity on whether they are strategic or non-strategic schemes.
Just in terms of the timing for those action points, do you have an idea at this point in terms of timescale? To 7.
I'll be completely honest with the inspectors that I don't believe it's going to be possible, certainly by next Friday. I think given my knowledge of officer availability, it's likely to be mid-August. I sort of fully appreciate that they may not be onerous actions, but I think it boils down to purely a case of officer availability in the coming weeks.
It's a cumulative effect of all of the actions together as well, isn't it? Okay, thank you for that. There aren't any within matter 7, I would say, which are critical to the post hearings letter. So if that helps in prioritising. Is it worth moving to the action points in week 2?
I'll very happily move to week 2. I can already feel by the thickness of the paper that there are a few more actions under week 2. I think about 80 in total by the looks of things. So picking up at matter 6, there are which was in relation to memory serves me correctly, the calculation of employment need and the policies that seek to manage that. Starting with action 42, that is a modification. So this is a very straightforward action that's underway. It's the consolidation of the modifications into a sort of a supersized single table that deals with the modifications on the basis of policy supporting text and other content, whether that's table or figures that is underway, and obviously will continue underway for all those actions that relate to modifications. Action 43, sorry, is also purely a modification around the sort of the process, and that there is consistency applied to how time periods are shown across the plan. We will seek to do that as we proceed through the modifications. Moving on to action 44. So this is provide further information, data showing B2 and B8 employment floor space requirements by specific sector, and show net loss or job growth figures. Again, my memory fails me on this, so I'd need to reconsult my notes, but it says here, provide more detail of examples of delivery of floor space requirements and specific uses determined through pre-application. I've put, for example, Creekside. I'd need to reconsult my notes on what that means. I can only hazard a guess that it might be around how Class E brackets G uses have come forward in support of the sort of redevelopment of ELSIS sites.
Yes, I think 44 is going to be critical to the post hearings note. So I think what we're trying to understand here is what the delivery of the floor space has been, and I think one of the sites we talked about was Creekside, and I think that sort of feeds into the monitoring of what you actually monitoring through that monitoring framework as well.
That's now understood. Yes, the sort of the intensification uplift that could be provided through Class E brackets G type uses. Yes, understood. The next two actions, 45 and 46, are modifications, both of which I think are to either the text at policy EC2 EC2E, and action 46 cross-reference to the London plan. Action 47 is relates to well, it's yes, it's a modification that's, and the council is being asked to demonstrate the proportions of uses within the hierarchy to aid interpretation and the assumptions that support these in the supporting text. Action 48, yes, so this I do remember, to provide the examination with further information on the quality of the quality of floor space anticipated from the ELSIS component of the Bermondsey Dive Under site. So that's coming through from our development management side of the service, and the sort of the contact that's been had with the Arch company and others in in respect of regenerating those types of sites.
It would be the quantity. I think is referenced in the note, not the quality.
Yes,
Probably what you meant.
my apologies. Quantity, not quality. As yes. Again, 49 is action 49 is to provide further information to the examination. So around the conclusions from the, if I'm reading this correctly, the Bermondsey Dive understudy. And yeah, if it's, yeah, I understand now. Does the site meet the requirements? So this is in relation to London Plan Policy E4. So I think that is, I would anticipate that would be a fairly sort of short paragraph from the council to demonstrate to clearly demonstrate how it meets London Plan Policy E4.
Yes, I think that one, from what I recall, there was a table in the evidence, and there was a column just saying yes, it meets, and what we were trying to understand was yes, because. What was the sort of sentence? So it may be that if you reproduce the table with some additional commentary against each of the criterion, that would help that. And that one probably is a fairly critical one as well on the list, if it's possible to do that before the end of next week.
So I think the good news I can give in terms of that one is that I know the officer who will be able to do that, Mr. Gibson, who gave evidence to the examination, will be available next week. I know that the information is just sitting in his head, so I'm hoping that I can somehow extract it. Moving on from employment to retail, action 50 is to provide the examination with clarity on the approach and data identifying shopping patterns and behaviours post-pandemic. I've written here latest Experian data. The officer in question who is able to do that is not currently available. They are on leave. So unfortunately that can't be done by next Friday. The next action, my apologies, inspectors, is for you. And it was a question of how we might deal with the requirement beyond 2035, whether we roll forward the current target. Action, oh, sorry. Carry on, thank you. Action 52, a modification to policy EC3, so add clarification related to sui generis and make criterion A clearer. And I've written here, and amend wording to provide flexibility, including point 4. Action 53 was again a suggested modification the council will review and if necessary remove wording at policy EC3 part A small 4. Moving forward, low cost and affordable workspace. So again, yes, so action 54 was to provide evidence to support criterion D justifying why B2 and B8 floor space should contribute to affordable workspace. Action 55.
Just
Sorry.
on, sorry to stop you. Just on 54, I think that would also be on our list of more urgent items, please, if that's possible.
Is it possible just to have a couple of minutes just to think about what the evidence is that the inspectors require? Obviously, there's a kind of viability consideration that we can draw from the viability review and also from our consultants' sort of experience elsewhere. Is there anything else specifically that the inspectors are requiring for that point?
Yes, we're just having a reread of that criterion just to refresh our minds of what that policy criterion was looking at on EC4. I think from what I recall from that session, it was about what's the past delivery been in relation to the affordable workspace in relation to the use classes that are mentioned. So looking back to what's been approved, to then be able to look at the policy and say whether the at least 10% of the rentable floor space is reasonable.
Get back to you on that just when we've had a chance to remind ourselves and look through our notes from the session, just to be sure that we're setting you off in the right direction on that.
Yes, yeah, that's fine. I think there was some participants, wasn't there, here as well, talking about low cost affordable specifically for B2, B8 in particular locations, as I recall as well. But yeah.
Yes, that's right. And I think that their point was whether it was reasonable to require B2 and B8 to provide, or to be asked to provide, that affordable workspace as well. So it's sort of looking at what you have delivered, but also the justification for why it's necessary for B2 and B8 to provide that low cost and affordable workspace as well.
Thank you. If I may continue, action 55, I think, moves on from that, and unusually, for the modifications, seeks to involve two of the participants, Howard Lewisham Limited and Michael Sparks Associates. So it's essentially the council will prepare a modification around criterion B of policy EC4. I propose that the council prepares that modification and shares it with those two participants for their comments. Modification 56 will seek to, so a fairly modest action, sorry, action 56 seeks to remove reference to the future planning obligations, SPD, and place that in the supporting text. Although having said that, the council does have an existing planning obligations SPD, which I know my colleague Julie Robbins reminded me we are still using. So it's if I dare say whether it remains relevant to continue reference to the existing SPD.
And is that a formal SPD? Has it gone through consultation? And yeah, so I think, and is it still in use?
It's not a young SPD, but it is still in use. I do see Julia nodding her head furiously.
Yes, it is. Some parts do need to be updated, but there are many parts of it that are still in use.
I think I can't remember the exact wording of the policy now, but if reference is made to the planning obligations SPD as opposed to a future SPD, given that there's an existing one, that I think that's been through consultation, I think that's probably more acceptable to keep the reference in. I think it was just a concern about referring to future one. And it may be that supporting text could just clarify or, subsequent iteration of that document.
Completely understood. That is super helpful. Thank you. Action 57 is to remove some text and rephrase text relating to meanwhile uses. Again, I think that emanated from discussions with other participants. Action 58, my apologies, the action is fairly ambiguous. It just says London Plan Policy E3. I know that upon questioning colleagues, we were uncertain as to what the action. I mean, it relates to reuse of brownfield land, what the action was in relation to. I should add, one of the very few where that is the case.
I think I would need to look back at my notes for that one, but it may have been in relation to a cross-reference or how the policy was used in terms of, do you use the London Plan policy in determination? If so, then your policy needs to sort of reflect and direct towards it. I think it was about how the policy was being used in practice in determining applications, but I would have to check my notes to be doubly sure on that one.
Thank you. Moving on, action 59 is also a modification, and that's in relation to strategic industrial locations, policy EC5, and that seeks to provide clarity on particular uses the policy would and wouldn't be supportive of, and that's again, well, helpfully cross-referencing to the London Plan and what it says. I'm assuming under as I would interpret under London Plan Policy E4, and the sort of the operational requirements that it describes for strategic industrial locations. Moving on to policy EC6, locally significant industrial sites. Two modifications. So the first of this is again to remove the list of sites from remove the table listing the sites from the policy and relocating it into the supporting text as previously done elsewhere. There's the next action, again, a modification. I think this is again about the consistency of naming of sites within the policy. Action 62. So this was to provide, and I think this again relates to an action which may arise, or indeed information that may already have been provided under the site-specific discussions last week for this site, and that's to provide the examination with a rate. I'm quite happy to provide the examination this information again, but a ratio of uses on the Apollo Business Centre. The breakdown of affordable housing, PBSA, and employment uses across that site. Moving on to mixed use employment locations policy EC7. There's single action there, action 63, and that's review wording of criterion C in relation to marketing. Action 64 relates to railway arches policy EC9, and that's add supporting text to clarify requirement for engagement with Network Rail and TfL. Moving on, action 65, workplace training and job opportunities policy EC10, and that requires the council to prepare a short note evidencing local labour schemes. That's dependent on a colleague outside of the planning service. So my colleagues and I would need to liaise with them. I believe they are teed up to do this work, but we would need to liaise with a partner service within the council.
Thank you. I think that one, number 65, and that information would be on our list for to have before that post-hearings letter, please. So if you could contact a colleague called Spike, and then it's a colleague or a system.
It is a colleague. We do work very, so a colleague in our regeneration team. We work very closely with them. I'm very confident that they will understand and appreciate the urgency of the request. Moving on, town centres at the heart of our communities policy EC10. Action 66, it's to provide an explanation of modification MO50 and specify the change that's being proposed. I would hope that that's a very simple exercise. Action 67, which relates to policy EC13. It says here, action update statement of common ground with land securities to clarify interpretation of the evidence base. I've got that down as provide information. Again, we can, if that's a matter of urgency, or whether it's the same urgency as the other SOCGs, we can certainly apply that.
I think it's possibly the same urgency as the collection of statements of common ground. So if sort of gather that one with the statements of common ground action.
Action 68 is a modification, and that refers to a representation on behalf of land securities from their agents quad, and it's to update the definition within the glossary. Again, hopefully a straightforward modification. Policy EC14, there are 3 actions. Action 69, so that's for the council to provide justification and evidence for the 50% retail use target. So this, if I'm remembering this correctly, this is about the approach to retail centres and how we're seeking to guide and direct retail uses to concentrate and coalesce within them. Given the sort of officer availability, this is the same issue because it involves the same personnel. Officer availability over the next couple of weeks may prevent a rapid response. So whilst I appreciate this may be a matter of urgency, it may be that it might have to wait till mid-August.
Yes, I think both 69 and 70 are on our list for needing to know a response before we can finalise that post hearings letter. I appreciate people are on leave, so it's a case of you need to do the best you can, and if we need to do a part B on a post hearings letter, then we may have to, but our preference would be for 69 and 70 to come in as soon as practically possible.
I think just as a general point, and without wishing to sound sort of overly sort of keen and eager on this, this is a helpful process, and certainly even for sort of officers that are currently away and won't be able to contribute for a week Friday, it nevertheless allows myself and colleagues to tee them up when they return. So it's very helpful to understand the urgency around some of those actions. I think Action 70 it rolls into that, and it's a modification that could conceivably fall out of Action 69. Action 71, I believe it's the last of the sort of collaborative modifications, and it's his work with land securities to consider introducing flexibility in relation to Class E requirements. Moving on, and I'm afraid we may hit the same issues that we've just discussed for Action 72 and 73. It is to provide more information around the context in relation to Criterion A of Policy C17. And Action 73 is, again, provide monitoring evidence in relation to Criterion V of 73, and I see just continuing onwards. Again, it's modifications around that concentration of uses policy. So 74 is to produce an illustrative map in support of that. So where the areas of risk around the borough may be. Action 75 is a fairly straightforward modification. Remove A5 uses from table 8.5. Action 76 is a modification to consider the wording hot food takeaways. I guess it's to reflect a sort of more accurate definition around that. Actions 76 and 78 relate to policy EC19 public houses. So 77 provide the examination a clearer timeline and more data in relation to document EB 31 to justify that the policy approach is valid. Again, I'm afraid the officer who is the expert on that is away, so that my comments about a mid-August timeline apply. Action 78 is a fairly modest modification to Appendix 5. Moving on to matter 10, which is securing quality design. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just want to clarify in terms of EC17 concentration of uses and the public house policy as well. Are they considered, in terms of the getting that information, is that considered critical?
No, they're not on the critical list. So they are just on the action list. So I didn't sort of identify those as being urgent ones. So the officer's relevant to those actions. It's not something that is immediate, but just part of the batch of actions.
So thank you. Matter 10, securing quality design, action 79 and action 80 are both modifications to policy QD1. The first of those to identify and list neighbourhood plans. It says the modification to consider the optimal or the best location for that reference, whether I'm assuming within the supporting text somewhere. Action 80 is the reference to the National Design Guide, and that will be within the policy supporting text. Action 81 relates to policy QD3. And that again is a modification. The council will go away and reflect on the scope of policy QD3 part D and its criteria. Action 82 is to policy QD4 tall buildings, or sorry, building heights. We will consider further modifications to policy QD4 part D small c, specifically in respect of other possible considerations or factors that may inform decision taking on the height of tall new buildings, including the possible impact on the specific factor of existing trees. Action 83 relates to QD5 and view management, and that's split across the council and yourselves. So it's to provide, it's written here as provide further information rather than a modification. The council will prepare a short note that further considers the options set out under its response. So I do remember this, set out under its response to matter 10 MIQ 10.30 at its response paragraphs 10.30.4 and 5. We will specifically consider whether there is a further option 5 that brings together existing evidence in relation to the matter, if on local stroke locally important views. And there's a few considerations that are listed under the action. Again, I look to my colleague David Syme as to the availability of officers to actually do this work over the next couple of weeks.
Yes, so the principal urban designer, Ruth, who was with me through the matter, is available to, I think the initial action was essentially to scope out the options and provide a timeline to the inspectors. So that could be done hopefully fairly quickly. Whether it can be done by the end of next Friday, is it the 26th that we're looking at? I'd have to come back to you on that, but that would be the aim, I think.
Thank you. I think that matter would need to feature in our post hearings note. So in terms of helping us to help you, what are the options available, and then we can consider the options and then reflect on that in the post hearings letter to which option would be the preferred option. So if the work on the options could come to us first, and then you can await the further guidance in our post hearings letter.
Perfect. Yeah. So